Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to another session of the big news, and in today's session, let's have a discussion whether Indian economy is going through K-shaped recovery or not. But before I start the discussion, here's a very important announcement. The Target Prelims 2023 initiative has already started. We are already done with the 90-day strategy sessions for the subject of polity as well as current affairs. Today at 8 p.m. we'll be having a strategy session for the subject of Indian economy, and I'm pretty sure all of you know that Indian economy is not just important, but a lot of questions are asked both in civil services prelims as well as mains examination. So today at 8 p.m. please join the session, and this session will be conducted by myself, that is Shamka Good. So see you again at 8 p.m. Now with this caveat, let me start the discussion. Is Indian economy going through a K-shaped recovery? Now first and foremost, let's start with the basics. Let's start from the scratch. Whenever any economy falls into a slowdown and then falls into, let's say, a recession, you expect the economy to recover. Now many of you will simply ask me, sir, what do you mean by recession here? Technically speaking, recession simply means whenever any economy registers negative growth rate for 2 consecutive quarters, this is referred to as a recession. For example, let's say in the second quarter, the GDP growth rate is minus 7%. In the third quarter, the GDP growth rate is minus, let's say, 7.3%. So for 2 consecutive quarters, if the GDP growth rate is negative for a country, for an economy, this situation is called as a recession. And if the recession is not controlled, it will snowball into depression. So any examples of recession in recent times? Of course, yes. After the pandemic had an impact on the economy, or after the COVID started spreading throughout the global market, many countries experienced a recession, including India. So whenever there is a recession, the government, the Reserve Bank of India, that is the central bank, etc., will take certain measures and promote a recovery in the economy. That is, promote the growth in the economy. Now, whenever the growth is achieved, what kind of growth is achieved? There are different shapes, or let's say there are different ways through which the growth can be achieved, recovery can be achieved, and representing these, right, how the recovery takes place, we use alphabets. And in recent times, one recovery that is being attested or that being recommended that Indian economy is having is the concept of K-shaped recovery. What is this idea of a K-shaped recovery? Simple. Whenever in an economy, if you divide them into 2 segments, one of the segment is performing very well during recovery and another sector is not performing very well, it is worsening, that situation is called as a K-shaped recovery. And why is it called as a K-shaped recovery? Simple. Imagine this is a GDP along y-axis and the time period along x-axis. If I basically represent that the GDP value was moving like this, and after the recession has taken place, now the recovery can be basically observed in 2 different ways. Some of the sectors or some of the segment in the economy will start performing very well. That is, expansion will be observed. The value of the GDP from this sector, I hope you understand, the value from this sector will be registering a positive growth rate. Whereas in other sectors, there is a negative, there is a contraction. If you observe this kind of a recovery is called as a K-shaped recovery. Now, why are we using or why are we discussing this idea of a K-shaped recovery now? Simple. After the third quarter GDP growth rate was given or was published by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, there are many experts who have come out and stated this is a clear indication that India is going through a K-shaped recovery. What is their proof? I'll come to that point, just give me some time. But against this, the Chief Economic Advisor has come out and stated, no, India is not going through a K-shaped recovery. Please do not read the data in some other way. There is no K-shaped recovery. And what is the viewpoint? What is the argument that the CA is putting forward? We'll understand in some time. Now let me come to the point. Why is there argument that Indian economy is going through a K-shaped recovery? First, there is always this discussion regarding the private consumption expenditure. Private consumption expenditure. Now what do you mean by this? Whenever you talk about GDP, already we have discussed this in multiple classes or multiple sessions. GDP can be measured in different ways. And one of the ways that you can measure GDP is basically through expenditure method. And out of this total expenditure, which is done by, let's say, government, by households, by the private sector companies, etc., the most important expenditure is the private final consumption expenditure. That is totally the expenditure on the final goods and services that is done by the households such as you, such as me. Now focus on this component for a very simple reason. If total 100 rupees spent on the final goods and services in India, generally around 60% of it, will come from the private final consumption expenditure itself. And if, let's say hypothetically, the income levels in the Indian economy go down, if the joblessness, that is unemployment rate, starts increasing, it is an indicator that the consumption expenditure, right, will fall down. And when the consumption expenditure falls down, the private final consumption expenditure automatically will go down, which will have a limiting impact on the GDP. Now for the third quarter, the overall GDP growth rate that has been registered is 4.4%. Overall GDP growth rate is around 4.4%. And the private final consumption expenditure accounts for around 61.6% of total GDP value. I hope you understand the difference here. Right? Don't get confused between growth rate and the GDP value. Whatever is the GDP value for this quarter, around 61.6% of it comes from the private final consumption expenditure. Now, if you compare this, right, the PFCE, the value of PFCE for the third quarter in the current financial year with the third quarter of the previous financial year, that is for the same time period in 2 consecutive financial year, the private final consumption expenditure has just increased by 2.1%. It has just increased by 2.1%. And within this also, if you basically divide this into rural and urban part, you will realize that, okay, the growth rate in the rural part of PFCE is much slower, much lower compared to what is the PFCE growth rate in case of urban part of India. And why this is relevant? Simple. The argument of some of the experts is that India is experiencing a K-shaped recovery wherein you can see different growth rates or different performance of 2 different areas, one urban India and rural India. Their argument is urban India, right, the incomes in that, right, or expenditures in this is growing at a much faster pace, whereas in case of rural India, based on this data, they are saying, okay, the expenditure is coming down, slowing down, which means after the pandemic, there was a lot of demand. Now this pent-up demand is going away. Some of you will basically say, sir, that was growing at a faster pace in the first quarter as well as the second quarter. The argument is there is a concept called as a pent-up demand. Pent-up demand means what is built up over a period of time. For example, imagine you have 100 rupees, but because of certain reasons, you want to spend money, but you are not able to do that. Best example, lockdown. So you have money, you want to purchase, but because of various reasons, you are not able to purchase the goods and services. After the lockdown is withdrawn, what will you do? You will basically use that money to purchase goods and services. You will consume more and more goods and services after the lockdown is withdrawn. That demand is referred as a pent-up demand. So this argument is there was a pent-up demand after the lockdown was withdrawn. Now that is going away, and that represents lower growth in expenditure in rural part of India. Point number 1. Second point, As per the latest data that has been published by Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, CMI, unemployment rate in case of India has increased. Third point, whenever you want to find out what is the demand for goods and services in urban and rural part, generally you look at certain kind of goods such as fast moving consumer goods. FMCG, fast moving consumer goods. The best example for this is the noodles, right? Maggi noodles. Now, this product Maggi is manufactured by the company Nestle, and Nestle very recently has stated that their sales of Chotu Maggi, remember this, it is the name of a product, Chotu Maggi. That is basically the Maggi which is sold in the market at 7 rupees. The sales of Chotu Maggi have come down. And what is the market they generally target these Chotu Maggi is? It is the rural part of India. And out of the total expenditure that is done on FMCG goods, somewhere around 37% of this expenditure comes from rural part of India. So their argument is a product, FMCG product such as Chotu Maggi, Nestle says the sales has gone down. They have reported losses on this product. Point number one. Second, all of you heard of a footwear company, Relaxo? It's basically selling footwear. Now, even this company for the third quarter says its sales has gone down. They have also reported lower sales in the third quarter. So the argument of some of the set of experts is look at these kind of products which are consumed by rural households, lower income households. The sales of it has come down, means expenditure has come down. Why do you think the expenditure has come down? One, inflation rate is higher. It is pinching into the expenses of the households. Second, unemployment rate in recent times again is a concern. Third, there is a rising uncertainty. There is rising uncertainty about the course of the economy in the coming days. And fourth one, the pent-up demand, the impact of the pent-up demand is slowly and steadily going out or phasing away. All of these represent that the incomes in case of rural part of India are slowing down. And this they say, when you compare with urban market, there is a divergence in the growth, right? The urban market is growing at a much faster pace compared to rural market, and hence they are calling this as a K-shaped recovery. This is one side of the argument. What is the other side of the argument? The government of India, that is Mr. Nageswaran, the chief economic advisor of government of India, says, no, this is the wrong reading of the data. The CA says, what you can observe is there is recovery taking place in both urban India as well as the rural part of India. But the pace of recovery, I repeat, the pace of the recovery in case of urban part of India is much, much higher compared to the pace of recovery in rural part of India. That is point number one. Second point is, whenever you talk about K-shaped recovery, one sector contracts or one part of the economic contracts and another one expands. And the argument here is the rural wages or rural incomes are not falling, they are not contracting. The demand in rural part of India is also increasing, but at a slower pace compared to urban part of India. So these are the two counter arguments which has been put forward by Chief Economic Advisor against this argument of K-shaped recovery. So these are the various aspects that I wanted to discuss with you people regarding this discussion which has appeared in multiple newspapers very recently. If you like these initiatives, please hit the like button, provide your valuable comments in the section below, and if you are yet to subscribe to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, kindly do it now. Thank you. Have a great day.